Welcome to the first virtual NAFB convention. Your session will begin momentarily. Before we begin this session of the first ever virtual NAFB convention, we would like to make a few acknowledgments. Thank you to BASF for sponsoring the virtual convention platform. BASF has been a sponsor of the NAFB for more than 30 years, and we appreciate their continued partnership. Did you know that by attending this session today, you'll receive points with the NAFB Virtual Convention game, brought to you by Newsmaker Plant Nutrients? Be sure to check the leaderboard on the site. The top 5 participants will receive gift cards. Before we begin this session, I'd like to remind everyone of a couple of things. Be sure to use the hashtag NAFB20 on all of your social media posts. And the NAFB Foundation auction also continues online. Be sure to utilize the proxy bid system to secure your bids today. We would like to send a big thank you to Corteva for sponsoring the video production of this session. Welcome to the first virtual NAFB convention. Your session will begin momentarily. Before we begin this session of the first ever virtual NAFB convention, we would like to make a few acknowledgments. Thank you to BASF for sponsoring the virtual convention platform. BASF has been a sponsor of the NAFB for more than 30 years, and we appreciate their continued partnership. Did you know that by attending this session today, you'll receive points with the NAFB Virtual Convention game, brought to you by Newsmaker Plant Nutrients? Be sure to check the leaderboard on the site. The top 5 participants will receive gift cards. Before we begin this session, I'd like to remind everyone of a couple of things. Be sure to use the hashtag NAFB20 on all of your social media posts. And the NAFB Foundation auction also continues online. Be sure to utilize the proxy bid system to secure your bids today. We would like to send a big thank you to Corteva for sponsoring the video production of this session.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the NAFB convention. a virtual convention this year. We're glad that you've tuned in and decided to be a part of this year's activities. Our convention chair, Gail Cunningham, has an outstanding program lineup that's put together. Today, there are 7 Newsmaker conferences that are going to be held. There's the Allied Industry Council and Management Sales Council meetings this afternoon. We have a new member and past presidents reception, and you can join in later this evening with virtual music bingo. That's right, get your bingo cards ready for that game. Midday today, we're looking forward to the NAFB Foundation celebration, a chance to acknowledge our scholarship recipients, internship grant recipients, and so much more. And a special guest on the Foundation celebration midday today is U.S. Senator Jerry Moran from the state of Kansas. We continue with Trade Talk tomorrow, membership meetings, the Night of Honors, and then on Friday, professional improvement session, the awards luncheon, and a chance to celebrate our 2020 president, Rita Frazier. We're so glad that you're a part of this year's NAFB convention. So find a good chair that's comfortable, stand up from time to time, enjoy the refreshment breaks throughout the day, and just know that you're part of something special for this year's NAFB convention. Coming up in just a few minutes, it's our first Newsmaker session. We're looking forward to the day ahead and looking forward to seeing you here on the NAFB convention website. Have a great day.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Kerry Martin with the Texas Farm Bureau Radio Network. Welcome to our first ever virtual NAFB convention. We'll begin with our first Newsmaker session, Exploring Agriculture's Contributions to the Energy Market. This session is sponsored by the National Biodiesel Board. Now, before we begin, here's a few acknowledgments. First, we want to thank BASF for sponsoring this virtual convention platform. BASF has been sponsoring NAFB events for more than 30 years, and we appreciate their continued partnership. By attending this session today, you'll receive points with the NAFB Virtual Convention Game. It's brought to you by Inuvia Plant Nutrients. Check the leaderboard on the site. The top 5 people will win gift cards. Now, here's a message from our session sponsor, the National Biodiesel Board.
I'm a soybean farmer, but I never imagined I'd be in the cleaner air business too.
We are creating and supporting jobs from the Gulf Coast all the way to the Great Lakes.
Jobs in rural communities just like mine.
We're taking what most would consider a waste product and turning it into a cleaner burning, sustainable fuel.
Biodiesel industry is saving the planet 1 gallon at a time.
We're excited to be right at the heart of it here in California, and I do believe we can change the world.
Biodiesel is the long-term future. It is here to stay.
Thanks to the National Biodiesel Board for your sponsorship. Now, before we begin this session, I'd like to remind everyone of a couple of things. First, be sure to use the hashtag NAFB20 on all of your social media posts. And secondly, the NAFB Foundation auction continues online. Use the proxy bid system to secure your bids. And finally, we want to thank Corteva for sponsoring the video production of this session. Now, I'd like to introduce today's speakers. As a veteran of 40 years of owning, operating, and supplying fuel to convenience stores, Ron Lamberty has also spent 2 decades at the American Coalition for Ethanol, providing logistical and marketing expertise to petroleum marketers who are interested in selling ethanol-blended fuels. ACE's market development team publishes the E15 and Flex Fuel Retailer Roadmap to complement its flexfuelforward.com website, which shares the stories of successful high ethanol blend marketers with other retailers, considering the addition of E15 and Flex Fuels. In 2020, ACE's market development program educated fuel retailers about USDA's Higher Blends Infrastructure Incentive Program and assisted marketers with the application process. ACE also recently launched an E15 compatibility tool called FlexCheck to provide retailers with a free way to check if their equipment is already E15 compatible. Lamberty created the BYO, Blend Your Own ethanol campaign, along with the Renewable Fuels Association to provide E85 and blender pump information to petroleum marketers nationwide. The number of US E85 stations doubled during that effort. Now our next speaker is Tom Very. He serves as the Director of Outreach and Development for the National Biodiesel Board. Tom works to establish synergistic relationships for the benefit of the biodiesel industry with key stakeholders, including feedstock suppliers, state soybean associations, fuel suppliers, end users, policymakers, government agencies, and environmental and health groups. Tom also works to identify and access resources that will address the needs of the organization and the industry. Now, let's get started with our session. Tom, you're up first. The floor is all yours.
Thank you, Kerry. Let me load my presentation up. It'll take just a little bit, but very happy to join you. Wish we could be there in person, but today I would like to discuss how our industry is doing. It's been a turbulent year because of COVID-19 for all of us. Our industry is no different, but I think we're getting our legs under us and looking better all the time. And I think it's going to be a better 2021. So with that, just a little quick about the National Biodiesel Board. We're located headquartered in Jefferson City, Missouri. We were started as the organization to represent biodiesel on federal and state policy through the research and education. Founded back in 1992 by state soybean commodity groups. We have offices in Washington and DC. Washington, DC and Sacramento. They asked me to put a little history together about biodiesel. Biodiesel's, it's been around, I guess, since Rudolph Diesel used peanut oil in the first diesel engine, but really the commercialization effort started right here in central Missouri back in the early 90s at Missouri Soybean Merchandising Council sponsored a project at MU, University of Missouri Ag Engineering Department. And from that, the Soy Diesel Development Board was formed here in Jefferson City. We're still located here. The name was changed in '94 to the National Biodiesel Board. It was nothing but soybean farmer leaders at the table. I was actually at that meeting, believe it or not. And they saw today if we ever had a day like today, they're going to need all the feedstock. So they deliberately opened up the industry for all the feedstocks to participate. Very, very wise and very far-thinking move on their part. So you can see the other timeline as we go down as our market was developed and built. And, kind of 28 years, we're still here in Jeff City, Missouri. How did we get the biodiesel industry? Just want to reiterate, it's really been because of soybean farmer leadership. It was a 28-year commitment, soybean farmer leaders being involved and having that vision. The original Soy Diesel Development Board was all nothing but soybean farmers. They were facing a glut of soybean oil, $4 soybeans. They needed a new home, new market for their bean oil. So this is why they started the National Biodiesel Board. And of course, since that time, over $150 million of soybean checkoff have been invested through the United Soybean Board and the 24 state soybean checkoffs. And then, of course, soybean farmers' political influence via the American Soybean Association helped shape our federal and state policies. You take all that plus the $6 billion plus in private investment, you got the current U.S. biodiesel industry. To go where we're at right now as an industry, in 2019, we finished at just under 3 billion, about 2.9 billion gallons of usage. That's quite a ways up from 2008, where it was around 350 million gallons. Back in 2008, according to USDA, we used 2.0 billion pounds of soybean oil. And last year we're at 7.9, and USDA was saying this year we're going to finish out using about 8.1 billion pounds of soybean oil for biodiesel. If you throw in what we use for renewable diesel, about another billion pounds, you're getting close to 9 or even over 9 billion pounds, 37% of the soybean oil we produce in the country. So we've become, the vision our soybean farmer leaders had back in the early 90s is represented on this slide. This is what they envisioned, and this is what is happening. As you can see, COVID, the impact, we started out 2020 thinking, yay, great, it's going to be a super year. We're going to crack 3 billion. COVID hit, and it was like, oh my God, what's going to happen? And we're looking at maybe just 2.5 billion gallons. So I think we're hanging in, the industry's hanging in there. Demand's not off as much as we anticipated. maybe 8%, 8 to 10%. So our industry's hanging there. If you look at the chart, monthly production compared to last year, we can see 2020 is beating 2019. So we're cautiously optimistic. We still might have a chance of getting up to 3 billion gallons. I talked to several producers preparing for this, and they're saying Q4 is looking pretty strong for them. Moving to our feedstock profile, historically, biodiesel has always been a half soybean oil, half everything else, and the major components of the everything else: yellow grease, animal fat, corn oil from ethanol plants. COVID had a dramatic impact on that. We lost our restaurant grease, slaughter plants were down, ethanol plants were idle. We lost a big chunk of our corn oil. And so biodiesel really shot up. The feedstock profile, you can see, really changed quite a bit as corn oil and used cooking grease went up, soybean oil use went up. So fortunately, it looks like it's starting to recover from our other feedstocks are recovering from COVID and are going to play a bigger and bigger role going forward. So, but you can see another one of the impacts of the COVID with the ethanol plants shutting down, the DDG supplies getting short, the soybean crush had to spool up, and really they were doing some record crush this spring, spinning off a lot of soybean oil. We were happy to be able to feed our industry, so we're able to balance out and keep going with that. What does it mean for soybean farmers, your average farmer out there that put in $150 billion investment? Well, StoneX, used to be International FC Stone, did a study of what would happen if biodiesel would just disappear today. And so their study shows 13% of the cash price would go away. So I got a good friend over in farms in Woodford County, Illinois, Rob Schaefer. I called him up November 11th. I said, Rob, what's your cash price at your elevator? He said $11.32. So of Rob's cash price for $11.32, $1.47 of that's attributed to biodiesel. And if you look at it another way, a 10-year average, year in, year out, Informed Economics study said that the advantage 10-year average is 63 cents a bushel. So if you look at 2020 crop, it's about $32 an acre additional value according to Ag Stats. Either way you look at it, it's a significant value back to soybean farmers. And if you switch over to the livestock side, of course, we're using their animal fats for our feedstock. That's increasing the value of their output, 10 to 12 bucks for cattle, $1 a quarter for hogs. And as we increase the value of soy meal, we decrease the price on our soy oil. We decrease the price pressure on soy meal, and reducing their inputs of soy meal $20 to $40 a ton. So very positive attributes for the livestock folks as well. Market drivers, federal policies, as our ethanol brothers know, if you're going to be in the energy business in the United States, you got to be part of the federal energy policy, same as oil, natural gas, coal, whatever. So we got the RFS and the tax credit. The past 12 months been fairly successful. A little less than a year ago, we secured a 5-year biodiesel tax credit. We were successful on an international trade case, keeping the subsidized soy biodiesel from Argentina out of our country by 300 million gallons. Going to the RFS, we got 2.1 billion gallons for this year and next year for biomass diesel. We're asking for a 15% increase in 2022. Everything's put on hold to the election. So we've had the election and everything's still on hold. So whoever's our administration, who's ever in the EPA, we'll be working with them to advocate for higher numbers in 2022. Also on a big win, we got EPA was giving us higher RFS numbers, but they were giving exemptions out the back door. So we've done a lot to close that loophole. We've secured 2011 to 2018 small refinery exemptions. Basically, in a nutshell, that saves 300 million gallons of our domestic production. So we still have some, we have 19 and 20 exemptions pending, but we're working to get those exempted as well. Other big drivers, carbon policies. We got California leading 24 states on carbon reduction policies, big impact. We got the home heating oil industry that's facing these, especially in the Northeast, these carbon reduction policies are adopting their officials' goal, transition their industry over to bioheat 100% by 2050. That's a 4 billion gallon industry, but they really don't think they have a choice. So if you look, you take all that together, if you see how our state markets developed over the last 10 years, maybe 233 million gallons is being driven by state policies. 2019 is 1.6. This year, it's going to be even higher. If you look at 2019, the state that really jumps up is California. I'll get to that in a second. But Texas, big oil state, second. Illinois with nice incentives, Minnesota with mandates, Oregon, Iowa, some great incentives and policies. But if you look at New York, it's 50 million gallons. They just passed a huge climate legislation out there called the Community Leaders Climate Protection Act. It's going to decarbonize the entire economy, 40% by 2030, 85% by 2050s. So we really think this could be another opportunity for biodiesel. Grow that from 50 billion gallons to 1 billion gallons by 2030. Going back to California, our number one market right now, 1 billion gallons by itself this year, I think is no sweat. 2020, going to 3 billion in 2030. What's driving that? It's the low carbon fuel standard out there. The goal is to get 20% reduction of carbon reductions in transportation fuels by 2030. This graph shows they're only about 6% of the way there. If you game that out, it's easy to see that we're going to get to over 3 billion gallon marketplace out there. So the top charts are just the raw volume of biodiesel being sold in California. I think what really stands out is the bottom chart, the percentage of all the diesel fuel out there. So you can see in 2019, as 22% of all the diesel is now biodiesel, renewable diesel. This year is probably about 25%. So University of California, Davis thinks when the low carbon fuel standard is fully implemented, 2030, it's going to be 60%. So very amazing numbers out there for biodiesel, renewable diesel. Look at that picture up on the right-hand corner. I took that when I was in Corning, California. That Love's Truck Stop sells no petroleum diesel. It's all blends of renewable diesel and biodiesel. Issues, we never have a shortage of issues. Number one is feedstock. We need feedstock. We need more soy. We're going to need more corn oil. We need more animal fats. We need more used cooking oil. We're going to need it all, and to be able to achieve our goals. Renewable diesel, we do represent the renewable diesel industry now. We get about around 600 million gallons of capacity, using about 1 billion gallons of soybean oil. StoneX estimating 1.6 additional billions of gallons of capacity in the next 10 years, using an additional 4.4. I've seen a lot of other stories think that number is even much higher than 1.6. Could be 2, could be 3 billion gallons actually in the next 5 years. Renewable jet, we also represent a renewable jet, sustainable aviation fuels. We have a member, World Energy, that has plants all over the country, but they got a plant in LA that produces renewable diesel and renewable jet. They produced 10 million gallons last year. They sell every drop they can. They can't make it fast enough. LAX, SFO, most everything out of both those have 5% renewable jet. Some flights United has, or Air France, or have up to 20%. That's exciting. We already talked about the New York development. Canada has a low carbon fuel standard very similar to California. That's a 2.5 times California opportunity for biodiesel, renewable diesel producers in our country. Electrification, we see that all the time. Light duty, they're talking about heavy duty now. California is leading the way. They got their goal is to get to 100% EV sales by 2035. And I think they're only about 6%. They've been at it for 10 years, very heavily subsidized. They got infrastructure challenges. They got clean up their grid challenges. They got lots of challenges, and they're the number one state in this area. So other states want to do this, but there's going to be a lot of work left to do, and even for light duty. And so for heavy duty to follow, it's going to be even more challenging. And we're not saying it's not possible, but what we're trying to say is that biodiesel, renewable diesel are excellent options to get carbon reductions now instead of waiting 20 years for a heavy duty diesel. So those are, in a nutshell, some of our challenges we got going forward. Our vision is to get to 6 billion gallons by 2030. A year ago, I'd say that would be pretty optimistic. Now I'm thinking it might be a little conservative, believe it or not. So, and when I say we need feedstock, I'm not kidding. we think the profile we got now for feedstock by 2030 is going to be, we're going to need 18 billion pounds of soybean oil. A huge amount. It's double what we're using now. And we're going to need more from used cooking oil. We're going to need our corn ethanol folks to produce more corn oil for us, our animal folks, all that. And we would still, I think we're still going to need some cover cress, penny cress options to get there, to get to where we want to go with our feedstock needs. So with that, I'll close it down. I'm going to leave you. My message is we need more soybean oil, and happy to be a part of this panel. And if there's a chance for any questions, be happy to answer those as well. Thank you.
All right. Thanks a lot, Tom. Next up, Ron Lamberty. Ron, the floor is all yours.
All right. Thank you. Appreciate you giving us a chance to be here. Brian Jennings, who's our CEO, probably would have been the guy doing this thing, but he's not feeling well, and we think he might, from what he's telling me about, he may be tested for the COVID here pretty quick. I had the joy of experiencing that thing in April, so I wish him well. So if you're out there, your thoughts and prayers for him would be helpful. My job at ACE is to develop markets for fuels. I thought it was kind of interesting. Tom was talking about the soy diesel history, and back when I was running some stations in South Dakota, and some of the first biodiesel or soy diesel that they talked about in the U.S., this probably be about 92. We did a test on the Sioux Falls, South Dakota bus system, and I handled all the diesel for it. And we learned about a lot of things through that test. I learned that if it gets cold enough in September, it's an issue, or it was back then. So some of the things we've learned have been used so that soy diesel is a much more prevalent fuel in the marketplace, and I hope they don't worry about it and some of the things they used to. That's sort of been the life of most of us in the alternative fuels or biofuels businesses, that there's a whole bunch of misinformation out there about us, and we spend a lot of our time trying to correct it. Well, I work mostly with fuel marketers, and we're in a little bit different position right now than the biodiesel folks are, because we've sort of reached a kind of a plateau the last several years. They're growing, and especially I see the renewable diesel business taking off in California, and I've got some slides about that here coming up. But we've been hovering at this a little above 10% of the U.S. fuel consumption, and obviously in a year like this year, that's going to be a little bit of a challenge. Using some numbers that we got from Pro Exporter here, but some of these predictions about where we're going to be with ethanol in the marketplace this year they're causing challenges, because there aren't people out there driving as much as they otherwise would. You don't know when this winds down, whether they'll be driving more and using public transportation less. So we don't really know, but most of our plants have been able to adjust and keep moving forward, but it's been tough on those plants over the last 6 months, 8 months, like it has been for everybody else. When you take a look at consumer demand, we had at our conference, we had Tom Closa come in and talk, and I talked to him afterwards to get kind of a feel for what we think will happen with demand. For 2016 to 2019, we sold about 142 billion gallons of gasoline in the U.S. every year. Earlier this year, EIA estimated about 9 million barrels a day in 2021, and they revised that earlier this week to 8.7. I still think that's a little bit optimistic. This year, we're going to end up with gasoline being about 85% of what those normal years were, 2016 to 2019. In 2020, Opus is thinking that we probably will get back to about 90% of that 2019 number, and that's only about 128 billion gallons. So 10% of that, or a little over 10%, obviously would only be 12.8 to 13 billion gallons. So if we take a look at what we'd have to sell beyond that, given what we think the volumes are, 14.5 billion gallons, which is typically what's sold in gasoline over the years. That would mean we'd have to get about a 10.9% share of what EIA is predicting, or since Opus is predicting a smaller number, we'd need a bigger percentage, 11.3% of that. Now, to do that, what we have to do is get more volume in some of the higher blends of ethanol. E85, E15, most of you have heard of the HBIP program if you're involved in ethanol and biodiesel. This time around, the higher blends infrastructure incentive program, where $100 million was put out to try and increase infrastructure available to sell more biofuels. The majority of that was for ethanol projects. So far, USDA has given out $22 million of the $100 million. When it's all said and done, on the ethanol side, we're expecting about 600 new locations, and a lot of them selling, most of those selling E85. Recipients in 14 states. Last time around, there weren't as many. And the projected, from what USDA put out, they project the increase from that program to be at about 150 million gallons annually. Now, that's a bunch, but we think E15 has got to become a lot more mainstream. And in order to really hit high volumes, we need to make sure that, like when we went as a country from about 4 or 5% ethanol to 10% nationwide, what we need to do is make sure that stations know that they have equipment that can handle the E15, the 15% blend. Most of them think that they've got to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars. And unfortunately, sometimes programs like HBIP sort of reinforce that. But most stations have tanks and lines underground that are compatible with up to 100% ethanol. And so we just started a new project that's called Flex Check. And it's basically a program that we put together to get station owners to go on and find out if their equipment is compatible. Right now, it's I think I can probably switch to this to a little grab of the screen, and I'll show you what this looks like. That page is basically, they would come here and they would just scroll down and enter, what kind of product they're looking for, the model number, the category. Like, here's an example of a tank manufacturer, Owens Corning, that shows here that the tanks that they've made after 1990 are compatible with up to E100. And we also have things like you can download a letter that EPA lets you prove compatibility by downloading a letter from the manufacturer saying that it's compatible if it's not UL compatible. Now, in this case, it's both UL compatible and the manufacturer guarantees it, but that's another example of what we've got. And the fuel market, or the retailer business, is kind of a 24/7 thing, and about 60% of stations are owned by people who have their own station, and they work in that station. And what we're trying to do is make it more convenient for them. In addition to having marketers realize that they can sell E15 and being able to put it in the equipment they've already got, so they don't need to have a big program in order to switch over to E15. Obviously, one of the things that has saved us, as was mentioned earlier, things like these small refinery exemptions that really could have potentially crippled our industry a lot more than they did, which is hard to imagine for those of you in the industry. But we had some big exports going on about that time that sort of blunted the trauma that could have happened for that. And it looks like this year we're going to have pretty decent exports, and next year expecting to go back up to close to what they were in 2019. So that should maybe ease a little bit of the pain. The low carbon fuel standard is something that you're going to hear a lot about from ethanol people. Ethanol is a valuable fuel because it is a low carbon fuel. And when policies are written to value that fuel, like they have been in California, you can see that those fuels go up in volume. And this is an example of what's happened just in the last 10, 11 years with E85 in California, where the low carbon fuel standard in the state created some extra dollars that could be used. And typically what happens with things like RINs, with the old tax credits that we used to get on ethanol, and low carbon fuel standard credits, is that a marketer gets a hold of this fuel and they're able to use it to lower the cost of the fuel, and that increases the volume. And as you can see here, it's been increasing pretty dramatically in California. So you'll see those kind of policies are things that we're talking about and working on in the rest of the country as we go on here this year and 2021 and beyond. The impact that it has on farm income has been pretty obvious and pretty well documented. And since we're, I'm sure, going to talk about some of the politics, it's not necessarily party driven here. The RFS went into effect when President Bush signed it into effect, and then the RIN program went into effect and volume went up because those RINs were able to be something that was used by station owners to pay for the equipment they put in to sell blended fuel. And as a result, it was an income boost for those people. And then in 2013 or 2014, the EPA blend wall waiver, when the Obama EPA decided that the volume was too high and they were going to adjust it downward, and there was a lawsuit after that that corrected that. But while it was in effect, it started hurting the overall income because the RIN prices went down, and as a result, so were the prices that were being paid for corn and the prices we were able to get for ethanol. And then the most recent one was the small refinery waivers that happened during the Trump administration, and those had a pretty devastating effect on the ethanol industry, and as a result, hurt farm income as well. RIN prices, as you can see from this chart, about the middle of it, as the current administration started, RIN prices were in the 80 cents to $1, but kind of averaged over 80 most years. Dipped down when there was a lot of talk about decoupling them and changing the point of obligation. And then when that went away, the prices went back up, but then they really took a hit when the small refinery exemptions came around and were struggling to even stay in the 20 cent a gallon range. And finally, when we won some lawsuits and the small refinery exemptions were declared illegal, then the RIN values came back up. And the reason that's important is because, as I mentioned earlier, when we have refiners that say they can't blend, there are private stations that do blend. And part of the reason they do so is because they can make some money selling the renewable identification number credits that they get for blending. And so when those are valuable, it's easier to put in infrastructure, justify putting in infrastructure to sell higher blends of ethanol. That's what I've got. And I guess, like I mentioned earlier, I appreciate the opportunity to meet with all of you. And I think now we'll take any questions that you've got for Tom and I.
Well, thanks a lot, Ron, Tom. Appreciate both of you. A few questions that I'll get started with. Ron, I'll just follow right up with that RIN discussion you just had. You showed that graph where RINs went down as low as 9 cents, I believe. They have recovered quite a bit. I heard today where we're around 68 cents today. So definitely on an uptrend as a possible new administration now is starting to move into Washington. Do you expect that uptrend to continue? And I can only assume that that is a good thing and beneficial for the biofuels industry.
Well, it's not only a good thing, but right now it's kind of a necessary thing because ethanol is selling for a higher price than gasoline. We've got right now, I think at the rack prices that I monitor the closest, without the RIN, ethanol is running 30, 35 cents, maybe 40 cents more than gasoline. And so when that RIN is taken out and credited towards a fuel, it makes it less expensive. So yeah, I think it's a good thing, but it's sort of a counterbalance because when ethanol is inexpensive and gas is expensive, then people buy it anyway. Then the RIN becomes something that you need in order to be able to make enough money selling the fuel on the other side. So it's supposed to reflect overall demand, and it's sort of become a political football where The RIN price goes up based on resistance to meet the renewable fuel standard, and the likelihood that the administration is going to enforce it. And so that's why you saw it drop when the Obama administration sort of, adjusted their numbers. And then when the Trump administration talked about moving the point of obligation and then enacted those small refinery waivers. So it's good for us from a development standpoint. A high RIN price is excellent because that's a small station or a chain that they understand they're going to be able to get some extra money back if they decide to put our fuel in, and they'll get those RINs, and it'll make them a little extra margin while they're still being able to sell the fuel less than their competitors are. So from a development standpoint, a high RIN price is usually good for us.
Tom, you mentioned an increase in the RFS that had kind of been put on hold until after the November elections. Now that we're trying to move past that and get into a new year, what's your thoughts on what 2021 holds for that issue?
Well, it depends who's going to be the EPA administrator. That'll be the biggest variable that we'll face. So whoever is going to be in that position will continue to do our best to present our case for higher RFS volumes for biomass diesel and advanced biofuels. So, it's you never know how this is going to shake out. So I guess if a Biden administration gets in, we expect a more friendly EPA administration. So we'll see.
Well, along those same lines, the SRE's small refinery exemptions have been, huge issue over the last handful of years. Your thoughts on what the SRE situation is going to be moving into a Biden administration? I'll ask both of you that.
I guess from our standpoint, we hope they deny the remainder of the waivers they've got. The court case that came out basically said that unless you've always gotten them, you can't get them anymore. So that's sort of where these retroactive waivers that, as Tom mentioned, that were denied, where those were all submitted, basically to rewrite history and have those guys all go in and say, we had those all the time, we just didn't know it. So, we're hoping they deny those waivers. They're supposed to be based on availability to get the fuel or overall economic harm being caused by the fuel. And I mean, we all know what's causing economic harm now, and it's not biodiesel or ethanol. So they really don't have the justification to grant them. But I mean, I could see maybe as a last tip of the hat to the oil industry by the Trump administration, that maybe they go ahead and grant them, or maybe they say, hey, we'll let you make this decision as one of your first ones to decide which industry you tick off first. So there's a couple of different ways it could go, but I hope the final outcome is that they have to meet the standard.
Well, Kerry, I'd agree with what Ron just said. We are a little concerned that if Trump administration is on the way out, they might just give the exemptions as a bone or something to the petroleum industry, or they might just keep it around and let them have the joy of trying to broker peace between the two industries, so to speak.
Thomas, on your presentation, where COVID-19 has definitely affected your feedstocks with the lack of restaurant business. I saw a story today, as a matter of fact, from Bloomberg that said that that's a real struggle, the lack of used cooking oil. It looks like you've been able to make up for that with soybean oil, but as we move into the next year, I know that's going to continue to be an issue for you. And if we do get to a post-COVID world, what does that mean then for your soybean oil use? Will it go back down so you have more of a normal ratio?
Well, I think you'll probably, we see that was happening now, Kerry, where it was getting more balanced. Now with the announcements of some more lockdowns, well, it might be disruptive again. But once we get past this COVID, I think the arrows for all our feedstock are going to go up. And probably the one for soy will probably go up more because, the soybean industry has more of an ability to respond to those type of price signals. So we think there is so much room out there. There's going to be with all the renewable diesel plants and announcements, all the carbon policies, there's going to be a real need for all our feedstocks. And I think there's going to be opportunities. I think we see more opportunities to get more corn oil from our ethanol brothers. It's going to really tough to get more percentage of the restaurant grease. Most of it's already going into our industry. But we could probably get a little more animal fats and definitely get more soy.
All right, I guess I'll wrap up with this last question. COVID-19 is, of course, the big factor in everything right now. Next 6 months, we're looking at probably a big slowdown in holiday traveling, and fuel use. I know that January and February are usually not the best months for the industry. Just pull out your crystal ball. What do you see happening for ethanol, Ron, and for biodiesel, Tom, here over the next 6 months?
I think it's going to be slow. I think you're right. We've got a likelihood that there's going to be some kind of more of the shutdowns, hopefully with the intent that those shutdowns will be long enough that the disease will get under control. We'll get vaccinations that are available. That sort of thing will happen. Then the question becomes, will people start driving their personal vehicles more? And as I mentioned, will they stay away from public transportation? Will there be more auto miles? But I think everybody, that's going to be offset by the fact that I think there's a lot of people that are going to keep doing what we're doing now and working remotely, and there won't be as much traffic in that area. I think, one of the things that I didn't mention was the hand sanitizer market has been one that, as this, health, this germs, hand cleanliness, health thing has come about, that it's been a market that a lot of our members have decided that they can get into. So there's been some diversification there. But I think it's going to be a struggle the next 6 months to just, try to get as much sold as you can wherever you can sell it. And, until we get COVID under control. I think I'm really proud of the way these guys have stepped up and taken care of others by doing this, by doing the hand sanitizer thing. And it's amazing how well they've been able to, keep people employed and keep their plants going and keep buying products. So hopefully they'll be able to do that for a few more months until we've got a better handle.
Yeah, Kerry, historically, the first quarter is a little slower for our industry. Talking to some producers in preparation for the presentation, they think Q1 will be maybe a little better than normal. And some of that's got to do with, now we got the tax credit in place. Let's kind of even out, usually have a slow first part of the year and pick it up in the second half. And if we do have more of a COVID shutdown, I think it looks like it has less of an impact on diesel demand. And so I guess we're cautiously optimistic. I've been hearing that we'll be able to maybe some slow growth in the first half of the year.
Well, thanks, Ron. Thanks, Tom. I appreciate you being with us today and helping to support this virtual convention. And thanks to everyone for watching today. This Newsmaker session has been brought to you by the National Biodiesel Board. Thanks for your support of our members and of our convention. Everyone, enjoy the convention.